These are 20 hidden facts about Rio Lobo that most fans have never heard. Secrets from a troubled production that marked the end of one of Hollywood's greatest careers and revealed the harsh realities behind classic Western filmmaking. December of 1970 brought Rio Lobo to theaters, and on the surface it looked like just another John Wayne Western with the Duke riding tall and righting wrongs in a dusty frontier town. Behind the cameras, a very different story was unfolding. A 73-year-old director struggled to finish what would become his final film while a leading lady claims she was punched on her first day of work. An Oscar winner returned to set and found even the horses wearing eye patches, and buried in a small role was a young actress who would go on to become the most powerful woman in Hollywood history. Today we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most fascinating productions in Western film history, and some of these facts will make you see this movie in an entirely new light. Others might shock you. A few will remind you why the golden age of Westerns produced stories just as compelling off-screen as they did on-screen. Let's start at the very beginning with the man who made it all happen. Fact number 1. Howard Hawks never intended Rio Lobo to be his last film. When Howard Hawks signed on to direct Rio Lobo, retirement wasn't on his mind. At 73 years old, the legendary director was simply doing what he'd always done, returning to a proven formula after a couple of commercial disappointments. The mid-1960s had not been kind to Hawks. His racing picture Redline 7000 underperformed, and his romantic comedy Man's Favorite Sport ? Hadn't connected with audiences. Any smart Hollywood veteran would go back to what worked, and what worked for Hawks was John Wayne Westerns. Rio Bravo had struck gold in 1959. El Dorado repeated that success in 1966. Now in 1970, Hawks figured he could do it one more time. And what he didn't know was that his health would soon force him off the director's chair permanently. Other projects were in development at the time, including an Ernest Hemingway adaptation and a comedy he was calling Now Mr. Gus. Those films would never get made. Rio Lobo became his final statement whether he wanted it to be or not. For a man who had directed Scarface, Bringing Up Baby, The Big Sleep, Red River, and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, ending on Rio Lobo was never part of the plan. Sometimes Hollywood doesn't give you a choice. Fact number 2. The screenwriter was miserable about making the same movie again. Leigh Brackett ranked among the finest screenwriters in Hollywood history, having written The Big Sleep alongside William Faulkner and crafted both Rio Bravo and El Dorado for Hawks. Years later, she would write the first draft of The Empire Strikes Back before her death. But when Hawks called her to work on Rio Lobo, thrilled was not the word for how she felt. Here's what happened. Hawks had originally hired a writer named Burton Wohl to write the script, but the results didn't satisfy him, so Wohl got fired and Brackett came in to salvage the project. Brackett spoke candidly about the experience. The more they got into doing Rio Bravo over again, the sicker she got. She kept telling Howard she had already done that, and his response never changed, saying it was okay and they could do it over again. One of Hollywood's most accomplished screenwriters was being asked to rewrite her own work from a decade earlier, and that reality wore on her. Brackett confessed that most of what she did on Rio Lobo amounted to trying to patch over the holes. Critics would later note the similarities to the earlier films, and now you know why. The person writing the script knew she was repeating herself, and she wasn't happy about it. Fact number 3. John Wayne never even read the script. This fact tells you everything about how John Wayne approached his work by 1970. When Howard Hawks offered to send him the Rio Lobo script, Wayne's response was classic Duke. Why bother, he said, since he'd already made the movie twice. Wayne wasn't being dismissive. Honesty drove that comment. Rio Bravo with Hawks in 1959, El Dorado with Hawks in 1966. The kind of movie this was going to be required no explanation. Wayne's approach to filmmaking at this stage had become remarkably casual. His philosophy boiled down to asking the director which hat to wear and which door to come in through. For some actors this might sound lazy, but for Wayne it reflected 40 years in the business. His screen persona was second nature to him. Audience expectations for a John Wayne Western were crystal clear, and his trust in Hawks ran deep. Whether this casual approach helped or hurt the final film is something we'll get to later. But the image of John Wayne showing up to set without having read a single page of dialogue challenges the notion of the dedicated method actor. Fact number 4. A scheduling conflict added $1 million to the budget. Here's a production nightmare that almost derailed the entire film before cameras started rolling. $5 million. That was the original budget, with plans to shoot in Durango, Mexico. Durango attracted Western productions at the time because of its authentic landscapes and lower costs. But a problem emerged. Burt Lancaster's film Lawman had already occupied the Durango facilities, tying up every soundstage, every piece of equipment, and every local crew member. Hawks and Cinema Center Films scrambled and relocated the entire production to Old Tucson Studios in Arizona, a decision that didn't come cheap. $1 million got added to the budget from the location change alone, and in 1970 money that represented a massive hit. The final cost reached $6 million, making Rio Lobo the most expensive film in Hawks' informal trilogy of Wayne westerns. Here's the painful part. Theatrical rentals brought in only $4.25 million, ranking 20th among 1970's highest earners, but still leaving the film roughly $2 million short of breaking even. The most expensive of the three Rio pictures became the only one to lose money, and it all started with a scheduling conflict. Fact number 5. The film was briefly renamed just days before production. This small detail gets overlooked by most film historians, but it reveals just how chaotic pre-production became. Around March 6th, just days before cameras started rolling on March 16th of 1970, Cinema Center Films briefly retitled the project San Timoteo. Why the sudden name change? The historical record doesn't provide a clear answer, but the studio quickly reversed course and went back to Rio Lobo before filming began. Perhaps someone realized Rio Lobo better connected the film to its predecessors Rio Bravo and El Dorado. Perhaps market research suggested audiences would respond better to the original title. Whatever the reason, San Timoteo became a footnote in film history, a what-if title that never reached theater marquees. Fact number 6. The eye patch prank that made John Wayne cry. Now we come to one of the most heartwarming stories from the Rio Lobo production. During a break in filming, John Wayne traveled to the Academy Awards ceremony, and on April 7th of 1970, the Duke won his first and only Academy Award for his performance as Rooster Cogburn in True Grit. Career-defining doesn't begin to describe that moment for an actor who had been nominated only once before, way back in 1949 for Sands of Iwo Jima. When Wayne returned to the Rio Lobo set, Howard Hawks had organized a very special welcome. According to the biography John Wayne, American by Randy Roberts, here's what happened. Wayne stepped out of his car and looked around the set, laughing uproariously at first before settling down into a teary-eyed smile. What did he see? Everybody on set wearing an eye patch. Every crew member, every cast member, even the horses. The eye patches paid tribute to Rooster Cogburn, Wayne's one-eyed marshal from True Grit. Hawks had coordinated the entire gag, getting everyone involved to honor Wayne's long-overdue Oscar victory. If that image of John Wayne tearing up at the sight of horses wearing eye patches doesn't make you smile, you might want to check your pulse. And if you're enjoying these stories from classic Hollywood, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our other deep dives into the golden age of westerns. Fact number 7. Jennifer O'Neill claims Hawks punched her on the first day. Now we shift to a much darker story, because the treatment of leading lady Jennifer O'Neill remains the production's most disturbing revelation. O'Neill was just 22 when she landed the role, primarily known as a cover girl model rather than an experienced actress. According to her later interviews, misery defined her experience on set from day one. O'Neill claimed that Howard Hawks punched her in the stomach on her very first day of filming because her voice was too high. Hawks then instructed her to go to the woods and scream to roughen up her vocal cords. The relationship deteriorated further when O'Neill refused to sign a 3-picture contract with Hawks, and according to her, the director turned cold after that refusal. She later described Hawks' rigid expectations. Howard Hawks had this image of what a woman should be, tall and brown-haired and blue-eyed, and she was supposed to speak in a particular low register through the entire movie. She hated it. Hawks proved equally harsh in his own interviews about O'Neill, calling her a great mistake and claiming everything the girl did was wrong. Reports indicate Hawks deliberately made all of O'Neill's shots uncomplimentary and cut so much of her material that her character essentially disappears 15 minutes before the film's ending. Despite Hawks's treatment, O'Neill remembered one person fondly from the production. She called John Wayne the nicest guy in the world and said he went out of his way to help young actors on set. Fact number 8. A future studio executive is hiding in a minor role. Here's a fact that will make you want to rewatch Rio Lobo immediately. Playing the small role of Amelita, the Mexican woman whose face is disfigured by the villain, is an actress named Sherry Lansing. This stands as one of only 2 acting credits in her entire career. Lansing looked at her performance and reached a conclusion. She had no talent. Acting was over for her. But Sherry Lansing's story was just beginning. 1980 brought a groundbreaking appointment when Lansing, at age 35, was named president of 20th Century Fox Productions. She became the first woman in history to head a major Hollywood studio, a headline-making moment that reverberated around the world. Later, Lansing became chairman of Paramount Pictures, holding that position from 1992 to 2004. During her tenure, she oversaw Best Picture Academy Award winners, including Forrest Gump, Braveheart, and Titanic. Arguably the most powerful woman in Hollywood history, and her film career started with a bit part in Rio Lobo. Looking back on her brief acting career, Lansing has been characteristically self-deprecating. In an interview with CBS, she admitted she really was a bad actress and would have not cast herself. Why did Hawks cast her in the first place? Reports say he cast her specifically because she was tall, fitting his rigid idea of what women should look like on screen. That same rigidity that made Jennifer O'Neill's life miserable also gave a future mogul her Hollywood start. Fact number 9. Robert Mitchum rejected the film in brutal fashion. Howard Hawks originally wanted to reunite John Wayne with Robert Mitchum, who had played the drunken sheriff in El Dorado, a crowd-pleasing reunion of two of Hollywood's biggest stars. When Mitchum visited his son Chris on the Rio Lobo set, Hawks made his pitch personally, asking Mitchum to reprise his drunken sheriff role. Mitchum declined. His explanation was that he claimed he was retired. Wayne's response captured the Duke perfectly. "Mitch has been retiring ever since the first day I met him." The real reason for Mitchum's rejection was reportedly his salary demands, which exceeded what the already strained budget could handle. Hawks would have to find another solution for the supporting cast, and that solution would involve Mitchum's son. Fact number 10. Hawks fought the studio to cast Chris Mitchum. With Robert Mitchum out of the picture, Hawks turned his attention to Mitchum's son Chris, but Cinema Center Films wasn't interested. The studio initially rejected Chris Mitchum for the role and insisted on casting a different actor. Hawks disagreed, and the strength of his disagreement became legendary. Hawks threatened to shut down the entire production if the studio didn't let him cast Chris Mitchum. A 73-year-old director, already dealing with budget overruns and location problems, was willing to walk away from the whole project over a casting decision. That was Howard Hawks. When he wanted something, he fought for it. The studio relented. Chris Mitchum got the role of Sergeant Tuscarora Phillips, and while he may not have possessed his father's star power, he acquitted himself well in the part. Fact number 11. John Wayne's physical decline was painfully visible. 62 years old during filming, and the years were catching up with John Wayne. Recovery from a torn ligament in his shoulder still plagued him, an injury sustained during The Undefeated in 1969. The effects of his 1964 lung cancer surgery, which removed an entire lung, continued to affect him as well. Hawks complained privately that Wayne was too old for the role, noting difficulty mounting his horse and the need to hold his belly in during filming. Physical limitations affected how scenes could be shot. Wayne's fight scene with Victor French required very careful filming, with most shots using a stunt double while the actual fight happened off-camera with only the sounds of scuffling audible. Jennifer O'Neill recalled one particularly difficult scene where Wayne had to carry her up the stairs. He became completely exhausted and really struggled through it. A body double stood in even for a benign scene of Wayne simply leaving a house, and that's when personal tragedy struck during production. Wayne's mother died in March of 1970 while filming continued. Then just a month after production wrapped, his brother Robert also passed away. The Duke soldiered on as he always did, but Rio Lobo captures a John Wayne clearly at the end of his physical prime. Fact number 12. Hawks was injured and needed stitches during filming. The opening sequence of Rio Lobo features a spectacular train robbery that many critics consider the best part of the entire film, but Howard Hawks didn't direct most of it. During the filming of this sequence, the 73-year-old director sustained an injury that required 4 stitches to treat. Legendary stuntman Yakima Canutt took over direction of the train robbery sequence as a result. Canutt ranked among the most respected figures in Hollywood history, a man who had revolutionized stunt work and second-unit direction. Film critic Jonathan Rosenbaum later noted the irony, pointing out that the fact the film's best action sequence was directed by the second unit is emblematic of Hawks' relative lack of engagement with the material. Canutt's connection to John Wayne went back decades. More than 35 Wayne movies since 1932 had featured Canutt as a stunt double. Even more significantly, Canutt had helped shape Wayne's iconic physical persona, because the Duke had copied Canutt's drawling speech and hip-rolling walk early in his career, mannerisms that would define the John Wayne image for generations. Fact number 13. There's a hidden Easter egg connecting to Wayne's past. Here's a detail that eagle-eyed viewers might catch on a rewatch. In Sheriff Pat Cronin's office, a wanted poster hangs visible on the wall for a character named Hondo Lane. Hondo Lane was the character John Wayne played in the film Hondo, released nearly 20 years earlier in 1953. A subtle callback to Wayne's extensive Western filmography, a little wink to dedicated fans. Whether Hawks devised this, or the prop department made the decision, or it simply happened by accident, remains unclear. But it's exactly the kind of hidden detail that rewards careful viewing. Fact number 14. A literary icon got shot by John Wayne. Watch Rio Lobo closely and you'll notice the fourth gunman who gets shot by Wayne looks distinctly out of place in a Western. That's because he was. George Plimpton, the founder of the Paris Review and one of America's most celebrated literary figures, appears in Rio Lobo as a gunman who meets his end at Wayne's hands. This fit into Plimpton's famous participatory journalism phase, during which he tried his hand at various professions and documented the experiences. Plimpton had previously trained with the Detroit Lions football team, an experience he chronicled in his book Paper Lion. Now he was trying his hand at being a Western movie villain. ABC aired a 60-minute television special about Plimpton's Rio Lobo experience called Plimpton. Shootout at Rio Lobo on December 9 of 1970, just 9 days before the film's theatrical release. The special included behind-the-scenes footage, clips from Hawks' other films, and outtakes from the production. Fact number 15. Jack Elam stole scenes and paid the price. Character actor Jack Elam built his career on stealing scenes, and Rio Lobo proved no exception. Playing Old Man Phillips, Elam delivered a performance that critics described as chewing up the scenery and spitting it out. John Wayne apparently agreed with that assessment, but happiness was not his reaction. Wayne felt Elam had stolen several scenes from him, and the Duke decided to do something about it. When Wayne's next Western The Train Robbers went into production in 1973, Elam received an offer for the role of Grady. A nice payday awaited the character actor, but Wayne vetoed the casting, refusing to work with Elam again. Even in the twilight of his career, John Wayne remained protective of his screen presence. Scene stealers weren't welcome in the Duke's pictures. Fact number 16. Jorge Rivero had to learn his lines phonetically. Mexican star Jorge Rivero was making only his second American film when he landed the role of Captain Pierre Frenchy Cordona in Rio Lobo, and a significant challenge awaited him. Rivero struggled with English and had to learn his lines phonetically, working with an English teacher from his university days to get the words right. Hawks complained that Rivero was too slow and lacked authority in his line delivery, but the director tried to make the best of the situation. In romantic scenes, Hawks played Rivero's hesitation, as the character genuinely being unsure of what to say. Rivero brought unusual credentials for a leading man in a Western: a degree in chemical engineering, experience as a champion bodybuilder, track star, JLI player, and water polo athlete. His very first film role had required him to wear a mask the entire time, because he played a masked wrestler. Fact number 17. The scene that Wayne found funny. Howard Hawks discussed one of Rio Lobo's darker moments in interviews, revealing John Wayne's somewhat surprising reaction. In the scene, a man is set on fire. As he's burning, someone moves to pick up a blanket to put out the flames. Wayne's character stops them and says to let him burn. Another character responds not to let him burn so much that he can't sign the papers they need him to sign. Hawks's assessment of the scene was that he didn't know why, but to him it was funny. A moment that reveals the darker edge lurking beneath Hawks and Wayne's Western heroics. Frontier justice in their films wasn't always pretty. Fact number 18. Hawks called his own film garbage. Most directors defend their work, even their lesser efforts. Howard Hawks was not most directors. In a 1975 interview with Film Heritage magazine, Hawks was brutally honest about Rio Lobo. A mistake, he called it. He didn't like it, and didn't think it was any good. Hawks explained that he only made the film because he had a good story, but the studio couldn't afford to put a man as good as Wayne in it, so they ended up with the cast they had. His final assessment was devastating. He saved the story and just wrote that damn piece of junk, and made it. That damn piece of junk. The director's own words for his final film. A remarkably candid admission from a man who had spent 45 years in Hollywood directing some of the greatest films ever made. Fact number 19. Quentin Tarantino uses Rio Lobo as a career warning. Here's how Rio Lobo's legacy has evolved in modern film culture. Quentin Tarantino has repeatedly cited Rio Lobo as a primary reason he wants to retire after making 10 films. The acclaimed director has said that the most cutting-edge artists, the coolest guys, the hippest dudes, they're the ones that stay at the party too long. They're the ones that make those last 2 or 3 movies that are completely out of touch. Tarantino's conclusion was direct. He doesn't want to make Rio Lobo. A harsh judgment, but one that comes from a place of respect for Hawke's earlier work. Tarantino is saying that even legends can lose their touch, and he'd rather go out on top than fade away. This quote has arguably become more famous than Rio Lobo itself among modern film fans. Hawke's final Western has become a cautionary tale about knowing when to walk away. Fact number 20. Hawke's death 6 years later was caused by a dog. Howard Hawks never directed again after Rio Lobo. Early-stage Parkinson's disease developed, and lingering effects from his leg injury on the Rio Lobo set continued to plague him. 1975 brought some long-overdue recognition when Hawks received an honorary Academy Award presented to him by none other than John Wayne. The award recognized him as a master American filmmaker whose creative efforts hold a distinguished place in world cinema. Then on December 26 of 1977, tragedy struck at Hawks' home in Palm Springs. Hawks tripped over his dog at home and suffered a concussion. 2 weeks in the hospital followed. Eventually he asked to go home, and days later he passed away at age 81. The official cause of death was listed as arteriosclerotic vascular disease with stroke, an unceremonious end for a man who had given so much to American cinema. John Wayne, who had worked with Hawks on 5 films over 3 decades, would follow his old friend less than 2 years later, passing away on June 11 of 1979. A critical legacy. When Rio Lobo reached theaters in December of 1970, the reviews were not kind. Variety dismissed the film, saying Hawks' direction was as listless as the plot. TV Guide cut even deeper, calling it an atrocity not worth the silver used in the negative for such a refined director as Hawks to end his career on a note like this. Roger Ebert proved more generous, giving it 3 out of 4 stars while noting it was just a shade tired. But Roger Greenspun of the New York Times went in the complete opposite direction. He controversially called Rio Lobo close enough to greatness to stand above everything else so far in the current season, and his positive review generated numerous angry letters from readers who disagreed. Time has softened some of those harsh opinions. Today Rio Lobo holds a 70% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 23 reviews. The critical consensus has shifted from dismissal to qualified appreciation. Time Out's Jeff Andrew perhaps captured it best, noting that if Rio Lobo lacks the formal perfection of Rio Bravo and the moving elegy for men grown old of El Dorado, it's still a marvelous film. The complete picture. So what do we make of Rio Lobo all these years later? On one level it's exactly what Howard Hawks said it was. A tired retread of better films made by a director past his prime, starring an actor whose body was failing him, written by a screenwriter who didn't want to be there. But on another level, Rio Lobo is a fascinating document of Hollywood at a crossroads. The old studio system was dying while new Hollywood was rising. And here was Hawks, one of the great craftsmen of classical cinema, trying to make the kind of movie that had worked for decades even as the world changed around him. The production stories we've explored today reveal the human cost of that transition. A young actress mistreated by a director who couldn't adapt his methods. A leading man hiding his physical limitations from the camera. A future mogul learning what she didn't want to do with her life. A literary icon playing cowboy. Horses wearing eye patches to celebrate an Oscar. Rio Lobo may not be Howard Hawks' greatest film, and may not even be his best Western, but its behind-the-scenes story is as compelling as anything that made it to the screen. The film is available today on streaming services including Fubo TV, Plex, Pluto TV, and Fossum. Rental or purchase options include Prime Video, Apple TV, and Fandango at Home. In November of 2025, Eureka Entertainment released a new Masters of Cinema limited edition Blu-ray in the UK, limited to 2,000 copies and featuring new interviews with Western scholars. For fans of classic Westerns, Rio Lobo is worth revisiting with fresh eyes. Knowing what we now know about what happened behind the cameras, you'll see the film differently. Every scene with Jennifer O'Neill takes on new weight, every physical moment from Wayne reveals his struggle, and that spectacular opening train robbery reminds us that even legends sometimes need help. Howard Hawks called it that damn piece of junk. Quentin Tarantino uses it as a warning. But for those of us who love the golden age of Westerns, Rio Lobo is something more. A time capsule, a memorial, and proof that even flawed films can tell extraordinary stories. That wraps up our 20 hidden facts about Rio Lobo. If you learned something new today, hit that like button and leave a comment telling us your favorite John Wayne Western. And make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into classic Hollywood Westerns, because we've got plenty more stories to tell about the legends who made the movies we grew up loving. Until next time, keep watching the classics.